let me start off first with some data that you can find into the reports that we just launched. So some of that was shared this morning, but here's a little bit more of what you can find into both our directories and our reports that you have out there. One of the things that we've been studying how many organizations today that we call specifically bridge organizations are providing services for in support of innovation, both inbound and outbound. And basically, what are they tracking? What are the best practices that can be shared with the rest of the public? Those are some numbers. It's interesting to see that it's not just corporates that are coming here, but it's also a lot of governments. We are counting now 31 countries that we represented here. There were, out of those government organizations, there were 11 just before 2000, and now, you can see how many are out there. They represent and employ more than 500 people to our accounts, and you can see how this escalation is really showing acceleration in the last few years. Very interesting, and we're going to see tomorrow how that applies to corporates. The representation of corporates is flipped in terms of what region, what continents are more represented here. Tomorrow we're going to see that it's mostly actually from Asia. There is a high concentration of outposts coming from Asia. Here we actually have a very high concentration of government organizations that are from Europe. And hopefully we're going to hear a little bit more why, and we'll be able to ask and answer some questions. But very interesting to see how Europe is higher represented there. Again, information that you find in our report where are all these organizations based. You can actually go and browse. Giovanni, come here for 1 second, please. I want to show the directory 1 second. But basically, you'll find each of these organizations, what do they do, and how can they be of help for you, and where are they located. Was there the last slide? And the last thing that I was saying that we can talk about the where to find it is what is their outcome. So is that specifically there in support of education? We heard some of the speakers here talking about the education. Is there also to support a physical presence and host a roof for some of the entities, both governments and startups and corporates, or they're here to create connections. And so that's the bridging part is definitely something that is key to most of these organizations. Some of them also represent the FDI, so attracting capital as part of their focus and missions. Let's look real quick. This is actually open for everybody to see how you can find those. These are directories that we open source now. It also includes the directories of corporates. So basically you can go and see within your search specifically what organizations, where are they based, what is their focus. You can search, for example, if you go into advanced filters, let's go and look at all the entities from Europe, for example, represented here, which is actually something that I presented last week to one of the European commissioners that happened to be here. And you find all those organizations, basically also with the personal contact, and again, for the entities that are here, this is open to feedback and support. It is an open source, so everybody's suggestions are more than welcome. You can also place those into a map and look specifically where they are placed, if they're around you, what is their office. And so you can, again, doing your sub-search basically and see where do I find this entity that I can talk to. So tomorrow we're going to talk about the same, but for corporates, CBC, and research centers. All right, with further ado, what I would like to do in the next few minutes is to present 2 use cases of these organizations. The reason why we asked 2 specifically is because we think they are particularly representative of a macro trend that is happening. And the first one that I would like to talk about is the delegation of the European Union to the United States, and specifically with the office in San Francisco, something that is very fresh and very new, and is actually coming from a person that has been one of our counterparts within the European Commission. So we have the pleasure of having with us Gerard de Graaf. Please, Gerard, welcome. And I mean, this is unscripted, so we don't expect, we don't have a specific neither slides nor you know, topics to discuss. But I thought it was an interesting moment to talk about the presence, the official presence of the European Commission here after several years of activities on different areas. I think is interesting finding also within the community that is here to understand what is the history, so a little bit of that, and what are the objectives, and then specifically I think we open to the public if they have any curiosity or any questions to ask. So I will leave it to you.
Yeah, thanks Marco. It's really nice to be here. I hate to correct you in my first sentence, but we're not a representation of the European Commission, we're a representation of the European Union, and that's maybe a subtle difference, but nevertheless it's important. We opened our doors 6 weeks ago, the 1st of September, so we're brand new. We're a startup, also in size, and like a startup we hope to grow. Maybe not as big as the ambitions of many of the startups or those that you may be representing or be involved in, but we do believe we will need to get a little bigger to have an impact. The European Commission, and that's maybe why Marco was a little confused, he was here about 30 years ago, the early 90s, and then I don't know who took the decision, but in its infinite wisdom, the Commission, when Silicon Valley started to kind of go from strength to strength, and somebody in Brussels decided that it was about time to close the office, and now 30 years later we're back. And why are we here? Well, because we were asked to be here. We had a lot of pressure from our member states, from the Consuls General. I remember coming here in meetings and saying, look, yeah, it's all very nice that you come here, but you're going back again to Brussels, and then you leave us all alone. And more of the issues that are kind of the topics of conversation here in the Valley, particularly around policy, around, say, investment, around regulation, are your stuff, your responsibility. So you must be here. You have to explain yourself and not use us to explain what's happening in Brussels. And then I remember saying, well, why don't you write to the President if you feel so strongly about it? And surprise, surprise, that's what the Consuls General did. They wrote to the President, and the President took notice, and then like 3 years later, here we are. And in a way, I created that for my own job opportunity, because I'm now heading the EU office here in San Francisco. We're co-locating with the Irish Consulate General, really nice, lovely people. But we have the ambition, like in a year or so, maybe a little longer, to set up our own European Union office, European Union house. What keeps us busy? Why are we here? Well, to learn. I think a lot of you are here to learn and to listen and to kind of test maybe some of our hypotheses. This is still a very, very dynamic area of technology. When we look at like the internet and technologies, we are still at a relatively early age and stage, and so a lot of changes will happen, and from our perspective it's important we're here, and so that to some extent, and this maybe, I don't know how ambitious this is, we can also influence a bit the direction of the technology, and you know a lot of discussions in Europe about what kind of technologies for people. I mean the kind of technologies to help us address our major challenges. I mean, how do we keep the internet safe? How do we keep the internet competitive? So a lot of, and this is maybe has been lacking here, a lot of the discussions here is about the technology per se, but not so much about like what is going to be the impact of this technology on our society and on our economies. And we're now feeling a lot of these impacts, both positive, I mean excellent, of course, improvements in our quality of life, in our kind of the way our companies can enhance their productivity and the quality of their services, but we also see very negative effects from technology, and that's kind of course something that raises concerns and where policymakers need to kind of reflect on how to address those problems, and in some cases that means we will have to propose regulation as we've done in the European Union. So learning, trying to influence, and more this kind of value-based. I mean, what do we want technology to do? How can we make sure that the technology are safe for people, that they don't unnecessarily disrupt our societies? I think that's an important dimension we want to bring into the debate here. We have also legislated a lot and regulated a lot, and I'm going to come to the startup and all of these things next, but I mean, Europe is the global regulator for technology and the internet. That is a fact. The US, for reasons that I'm sure you're quite familiar with, and kind of partisanship and just very difficult political environment, not much gets done on the Hill. A little bit has been done at the state level, but the European Union is setting the pace for regulation. You are very familiar, no doubt, with the GDPR. We have further regulations, the Digital Services Act, on which I have worked in Brussels very actively the last few years, which is about the responsibility, the accountability of platforms like social media to make sure that they prevent as much as possible spreading of illegal content and disinformation, and they detect, and then if they detect it, they should remove it. Of course, all within the kind of context of striking the right balance between our fundamental freedoms, like freedom of speech and also the importance of safety and security on the internet. The Digital Markets Act actually will enter into force in the European Union in about 2 weeks. This is about how can we ensure contestability of markets which tend to concentrate because of the network effect and the economies of scale effect. We have a limited number of companies, we all know them, and quite a few of them are actually established within like a radius of 50, 60 kilometers from here, that dominate the market. And so how can we make sure that they play fair and they don't kind of use measures or practices that are discriminatory or disadvantageous? Well, we have an AI Act. They don't need to go, which is under negotiation. We're working on data, on cybersecurity. It's a whole range, digital identity, of measures that will have a global impact. Even though we regulate for the European Union, not for the world will take notice. The European Union is what's called the Brussels effect, is setting a standard that governments around the world are taking well into account. So this is also a reason why we're here, because there is an important dimension of compliance and kind of facilitating that relationship. Maybe the last reason, although there are potentially many more, we're here is to foster the cooperation and kind of beneficial relationship between the US and the EU. This is a dangerous world in which we're living. I mean, the years under President Trump were incredibly complicated. We have rediscovered each other and are working as much as possible together to support and also to some extent preserve our models which are under strain. And technology cooperation is an important part of this. How can we cooperate, for example, on quantum technologies, which, quantum is a very powerful technology. Potentially, if you kind of dominate the quantum kind of technologies, you have, of course, important ramifications for national security and for military. So these are very important technologies on which the EU and the US need to kind of join forces to make sure that we stay ahead of the game and ahead of our kind of competitors and in some cases rivals. Also startups, and I'll come to that now. I mean, the European, there's a lot. I've been here now less than 2 months here in San Francisco. There is a lot of misunderstanding, I think, in both directions about the EU and the US. And what you get if people don't really understand, they start to come up with caricatures. This is very normal, psychologically you try to simplify because the world simply is too complex. And towards the European Union, it's often, and I've heard it already many times, you over-regulate, you kill competition and innovation in the process, and kind of technology-wise, you're in the Stone Age, maybe just a little bit beyond the Stone Age. So there is a quite often negative attitude about the European Union. And in this part of the US, of course, the Pacific, I mean, the Asia is even more important. If you contact to Washington, I mean, we both share kind of the Atlantic as our borders. Here we are even further away from the European Union, and therefore there's even less knowledge and potentially even less interest in what the EU does. And it's also vice versa. Like, I think in the European Union, of course, the understanding about the US is also not sometimes very sophisticated. So if we can kind of help address that a bit to make sure, and I mean, we all know this, that there is a lot of innovation and potential in the European Union at all levels. There are very fascinating startups and scale-ups in the European Union. I think the policies that we are implementing, we're trying to exploit much more the single market. We have major funding programs in place. I mean, there is more ecosystems. They are kind of maturing in the European Union, even though there is still fragmentation, but the European Union is moving forward. And of course, so is the rest of the world. I mean, it's not that the rest of the world is waiting for the European Union to get its act together. But here, I think one problem we have is that we still need, particularly from a financial point of view, we need investments into Europe. I mean, we need to, for scaling up, it is not so complicated nowadays, relatively speaking, to get like seed investment or couple of millions of euros, 5-10 million euros. What is complicated, and this is what we see also in terms of like, well, where is there a gap in the European landscape? It is that scaling up, and this is where we continue to look at the US investment, also US kind of ecosystems to benefit from that. And if we can be of any help, and I know, I mean, Sergio is here, there's lots of member states, you see all the representations here. Of course, that is, I think, a concern and a consideration across the board. So that is also something on which we are going to focus. We have a lot of interesting startups and scale-ups in our programs. I don't know whether you're familiar with a tool which we call Innovation Radar. We're actually tracking. Horizon, as you know, is the biggest public funding research innovation program in the world. 100 billion euros are going to be spent over 7 years. There's tremendous innovation in these programs, and if you look at kind of some of the most successful European companies, they have gone, many of them have gone through Horizon. BioNTech, for example, behind the COVID vaccine was in the European Union programs until very recently. So we have a tracking tool, we call it Innovation Radar. You can find it on the web, you can even download an app where you can see which are, per member state, per sector, per region, per city, which are the interesting, high potential innovators and innovations in our program. And so also from that perspective, we're trying to bridge this gap between the investor world and the kind of rather far away kind of European innovations to attract more capital into this. I mean, I could speak about the EIC, you're familiar with that. Teething problems, we need to get all of that right. But Europe has high potential. And we need to exploit it, and we need to do so in close partnership also with the US. Very long answer. Probably I've used up all my time, so I should sit down now.
Yes, no. I think we have time enough, and I think it's the right time actually to really to get some open questions from a wider audience. We have a good concentration of corporates from Europe, and also a number of organizations that are international that live here, and so they might have some questions for you. Let me start with some simple questions though. And the first one is, why now? Why do you think was the right time to do it? Is that something that was in the works and then got delayed by the pandemic, as a number of activities like that we've seen before, or you thought it was the right moment to do it now?
I mean, my personal opinion is we should never have left, and if we left, we should have come back much earlier. I mean, so I'm not going to justify a decision which I think might be a little questionable to begin with, but why now? I mean, over the last, I started in the area of digital about, say, 10 years ago, and it was looked at as a sector. We worked in telecoms, etc., a bit on cyber. I mean, it is everywhere. Digital is everywhere. It is the key priority together with the Green Deal in the European Union, and the two also can only work together. We will never be successful with the Green Deal in the European Union if we not at the same time accelerate our digital transformation. I mean, we've seen with COVID also how important it is to be very well connected, to have the necessary digital skills and have the kind of the breakthroughs. I mean, we need innovation breakthroughs, more than ever. The societal challenges that we're facing in the world, and the vulnerabilities that we are facing in the world have never been greater. So we should have been here, we should never have left. We should have been here probably already a decade ago. It is not too late. A lot of the new technologies that are developing are being developed now. And we still have time. I mean, we spent, for example, a lot of time on the metaverse, in engaging with like technology companies here. Like, how is that going to be shaped? How are we going to make sure that what I mentioned earlier, that like a lot of the consequences of like the development of the internet that were not thought through, because the focus was very much on the technology and not on kind of what are going to be the impact on our society. How are we going to make sure that the internet is a safe place, and that we don't kind of see dangerous products or fraud and all this disinformation. That was not thought through. We're addressing these problems as they come. With the metaverse, which we know is still, I mean, it's evolving, and I mean, there's a rudimentary metaverse, but it will be another few years before the metaverse kind of really gets to a level where it will have a greater appeal than it has at the moment. These are the kind of issues we can now solve, or at least address the policy issues. Technology and policy need to work together, and that hasn't been the case in the past, and it must be the case in the future. Because I think the key point here is about trust. If people like AI, if people don't trust AI because they see it's not taking into account their concerns, their fears, their anxieties, we will have a technological backlash. And the European Union is maybe a bit more even prone to technology backlashes than in the US, because we're also like precautionary principles. We don't like things to go wrong when they could have been going right. Whereas in the US, maybe there's a little bit more scope for experimentation. So these things need to be discussed. That's why we are here now, and that's why we will engage and we are engaging very actively with the industry, with the academia, also with the government in Sacramento to make sure that this is a debate that isn't just taking place in Europe, it's a debate that's taking place here as part of the digital diplomacy.
Leo, let me open to questions here from the audience. Please raise your hand. Right here.
Good morning. I have a question about the GDPR, because you mentioned before, and from my experience, I noticed that sometimes the GDPR can hinder some innovation, especially if we compare European scenario and the American one. From your perspective, do you think that my feeling is correct, or maybe not?
Well,
especially if people analytics are involved, is involved in that kind of field. Because I heard about some innovative companies that deal with this kind of data, and my experience suggests me that it's very hard to go into details about this sort of things.
Well, let me say kind of immediately that if the European Union in 5 years' time still talks almost exclusively about data protection and not about data use, we've got something very badly wrong. We need to use data, we need to valorize data. We are moving into like a data economy, a data society. I mean, what is AI without data? It's useless. And so the European Union has a handicap in terms of data. If you look at the US, you have got very big platforms that sit on mountains of data. If you look at China, they have very big volumes of data because they're China, and they're not kind of held back by any kind of legal or political consideration. So we need to kind of we need to turn ourselves into a data economy. We do not see the two as opposites. I mean, we think protecting personal data, making sure that the citizens have agency, they control, they can say, yes, I consent, I agree to the data being used, and the data use is not inconsistent. There's a little bit of tension between the two, but that is bridgeable. And this will have to happen because if you look at all the potential, I mean, take personalized medicine. I mean, how can you have personalized medicine if people are not agreeing to sharing their personal health data with kind of the trusted sources, so that actually the medication can be kind of attuned to their particular needs and kind of physiological characteristics. so this is the challenge that we face in the European Union. But I think the problem with the GDPR is more in the enforcement than in the principles. I mean, the principles are not unique to the European Union. The GDPR is based on OECD principles of the end of the 70s, so it's already more than 50 years old. I mean, we had a directive in the European Union since 1998, so also the GDPR, which is from 2016, isn't new. It builds on a lot that has been done before, and I think from a general point of view, it makes sense that data that is kind of personal, it kind of can benefit from a framework of protection where people are kind of in control, that they in a way own their own data. That seems to be quite a sensible starting point. But what you often see is that the big companies find ways around it. I mean, if you sign up to one of the social media platforms, you cannot use their services without clicking to their terms and conditions, which run for 85 or 100 pages. There's actually an opera in Germany where people sing the terms and conditions kind of for about 4 hours. So I don't think many people ever have read the terms and conditions. But you sign away your personal data protection rights. And therefore these platforms are not so much impacted by the GDPR. But if you're like a small operator, and this is often where personally speaking, and the absurdity comes in. I mean, the butcher on the corner kind of, because he does a little marketing campaign, gets into difficulty because he stored like personal information and people aren't aware of it. I mean, that we have to get right, that we need to strike that balance right. There will be a review of GDPR under the next mandate, so 24, 25. I think these issues will have to be addressed. And I mean, it's a sensitive, it's an important issue. The GDPR will not go away, but we need to strike that balance right. The GDPR cannot become a bottleneck and an obstacle to innovation and to using the data in the European Union for the benefit of our citizens and for the benefit of our economies.
Other questions? Right there.
How you're going to manage the complexity between the European program you have in mind and the local program that every state already has and put in place? Thanks.
I mean, in the European Union, I mean, we have a division of responsibilities. I mean, the European Union is responsible for the single market, so a lot of the legislation I talked about with the GDPR is a European competence, even though implementation very often involves member states' structures and like data protection agencies. So very often it's quite clear, and also some issues are simply kind of global or European, and therefore the right level to deal with those issues, which of course is what we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years as the world has become more integrated, is at the European Union level. I mean, we work very well with the member states. I mean, here in San Francisco there are 12, 13 consulates general. I mean, there'll be a new one opening up next spring, Sweden. And we have like a very good information flow. It's like a mini Europe, I mean Team Europe, and we're trying to also to continue to add value to that so that kind of the whole is more than the sum of its parts. We do not get involved. I mean, a lot of the member states have their own innovation activities and innovation offices and agencies and startups coming and kind of partnering and accelerating these. This is not what we are. We are not going to compete with the member states that can do that much better than we do. What we can do, I mean, because as I said, we have a lot of high potential startups and scale-ups in European programs. Horizon is a European program, and they come from all over Europe. And I think the interesting thing here is not just that we're funding them, but they have gone through a tremendously selective process. This is like a Eurovision Song Contest for startups. I mean, so not you cannot just win by singing a song. I mean, you have to kind of really show that you're excellent, you're the best at what you do. I mean, we only fund about 5 to 6%, so we get 20 applications and only one gets selected. So I think that kind of almost seal of excellence is something that we will also want to valorize. So in a way, there is going to be like a pipeline of very high potential, promising startups that have gone not maybe through the national structures and the national programs, but have gone through the European program. They've played in the Champions League, in the European Champions League, and they have done very well. They qualified, and that can kind of work perfectly together with the member states' effort, because these companies that are very successful in these European programs very often have already innovations that are close to the market, come from all over the European Union. So we will be kind of showcasing these startups, whether they're from Denmark or Italy or Greece or Portugal or Finland, it doesn't matter. And we will of course work very closely with the Consulate General in doing so.
Excellent. So, in the interest of time, hopefully you can stay a little bit more during coffee. We have a coffee break coming up right after. So, thank you, Gerard. Thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm going to call on stage another friend here. I know that he has to go, so try to make a space as much as possible. Sergio Strozzi, ciao caro, Consul General Village.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. Good chunk of Italians here in the first row, so you'll play among friends. So the reason why I asked Sergio to come over and share a little bit more of news is because in the, you haven't seen it because you came later, but we were presenting our report of the new presence of countries here and the way they're structured and what is the impact of
I've seen
Yeah, you see it
Yeah,
in the background.
I did.
Thank you. The one part that I think is particularly interesting is the fact that also it's not just single entities from governments or corporates that are coming together, but there are also countries that are trying to put under the same umbrella and under the same roof a number of activities, whether that's from startups, from other corporates, for government itself. And here comes the story of Innovate that I would like for you to kind of share with us as an example of something that we see more and more as a potential option of how countries, regions can be represented here in a more holistic way rather than a one by one. So I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Can you hear me properly? Maybe like this, yeah. Otherwise there was sound. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here at MTB Scaleup Summit. And thank you very much, Marco and Alberto, for inviting me. And it's an honor to talk about, after the colleague Gerard, Graaf, who is a very important and expert diplomat about diplomacy and tech diplomacy. I'm the Consul General of Italy in San Francisco since last year, summer 2021. And I have to say I have been very lucky because my predecessor has been working hard together with many Italians in the Silicon Valley to set a new place for Italian innovation in San Francisco in the Silicon Valley. I arrived last year, the building was chosen, was there, was picked up. I had the big deal to make it work, but still my predecessor found, at least he found the place. And the place where we've opened the new Italian Innovation and Culture Hub, I will tell you more about this dual mode company. It's Sanson Street, which is downtown in the middle of, close to North Beach, which is the Italian neighborhood. 710, I invite you all to visit 710 Sanson Street in Novi. The nickname is in Novi. And as I said, it's Italian Innovation and Culture Hub. As Marco was saying, in the past years, a lot of countries, governmental agencies have been settling in the Silicon Valley, either in San Francisco City or in Palo Alto, South San Francisco, Menlo Park, or wherever, with their governmental innovation hubs. What Italy did is to have an innovation hub inside the city, so as I said, Sanson Street, and it's a combined innovation hub which deals with both innovation, startups, VC, attracting investment from United States to Italy especially, and culture as well, cultural promotion, Italian cultural promotion. So we mixed up in a very traditional Italian approach, culture with business. Why? That's because mainly Americans love Italian culture. So it's another, let's say, good excuse to attract people in the new building we have in San Francisco through means of food, culture, cinema, tourism, Italian beauties, and bring them to understand that Italy is not only tourism and beautiful places or cars, fashion. It's something more and more has to do with innovation. That's the message behind the Italian Innovation and Cultural Hub. So basically in San Francisco we have the Consulate General and the Italian Innovation and Cultural Hub. We have two places. And we've opened it, as Marco was saying, at the end of 2021, just before Germany opened the new research R&D, let's say, scientific innovation hub in San Francisco. And at the same time, our Irish colleague who opened the Irish House with the similar purpose. So Innovi works as follows. We have the Italian Cultural Institute inside. We have three subjects inside the Innovation Hub. Italian Cultural Institute, the Italian Trade Agency with two desks. One is innovation, and it deals with programs for startups coming from Italy, contaminating with the Silicon Valley ecosystem. The second desk is FDI investment, foreign direct investment attraction. So we have an expert dealing with getting in touch with big investors in Silicon Valley and working with me and bringing them to Italy for new and wider investments. The third subject is an accelerator, startups accelerator, and we're going to start the programs very soon. They're coming next week for the first time. So they are settling right now, and they're going to have, well, the goal is to bring between 80 and 100 startups to San Francisco from Italy, making them education programs, learning programs, mentors, and contamination with the ecosystem of the Silicon Valley, and take them back to Italy. We're not aiming at keeping them here, otherwise we would make our country poorer than it is. So that's the third subject with these programs for startups, innovative startups from Italy, in every vertical. We are not going to focus on a specific vertical. It's going to be a very wide range from cybersecurity to energy, life sciences, biotech. Of course, Italy has much to say about that. And we are starting now. If you can visit the website, it's www.innovitsf.com. You can have a look at the activities we've been carrying out in the past month. Marco was one of our main subjects and speaker in some occasion. We've been having activities with delegation coming from Italy. One of the latest one was in occasion of Dreamforce, Salesforce. We had 80 companies coming to San Francisco, and we carried out an event for them at Envoy. What else did I want to say? Basically, the message I can give you is, I was talking to Alberto right now. Italy is lagging behind about innovation ecosystems, but it's been doing a major job, I think, in the past few years. We are growing and increasing as VC capital market, and also talking about innovation and talents. Italy is a great power, I would say. So we probably still need to express our potential at highest level. But still, it's I can see from the number of investors visa, for example, we as Consulate General issue every week. The number of investors, American investors, Silicon Valley investors, going to Italy for investments, also production investments and startups, is increasing. So this is a good sign. And when you talk about investors, it's always about trying to see what their future perspectives are. So if you have countries which are already a little bit consumed as innovation environment, then the investments just shift to other countries which are going to be interesting in the coming years. That's why I'm very positive with Italy, and that's why the Italian government invested on our new innovation. I don't know if Marco, you have questions?
Yeah, so, and before I open it also for other people, maybe more of a comment, also to try to make it more generic as models are working, models that the world is testing. Is interesting because it's not just the country, it's the aggregation level of a promotion varies. And they're all important. We're here, for example, speaking of Italy, a region of Sardinia, they are represented. We had a few other regions where we're pretty active. Each country or relatively sizable country has a similar counterparts, and sometimes are the cities themselves. There is a whole ranking of cities that are becoming, the best destination to attract capital, human capital or financial capital. And it's clearly, a different level. And then we have the continent, right? It was the EU here talking. It's very hard to find what is the right balance, right, between, aggregations and it's clearly there is no victory here to be written. But I think now the concentrator as a country seems to be the one to experiment in terms of a really sizable outcome that they want to have. I don't know if you have any thoughts about the level of aggregation of those opportunities.
I think in the case of European Union countries, on one side we have a sort of task, which is getting more and more aggregated among ourselves. So on one side it's written in the laws, the constitutional laws of Europe. But on the other side, what I can tell you, to share with you my experience in this year, I've been experiencing here in San Francisco, is that the EU consuls, for example, community, is very much cooperating. We are aware that there's a huge competition between France, Italy, Germany, Ireland on attracting, investment and making our countries more performing with collaboration with Silicon Valley. But at the same time, we are aware of the fact, and I'm very glad to come after my EU colleagues, that there's this very big space for cooperation among ourselves. I think, when you talk about international levels, it's always such great competition among continents, as you said, Asia, West Coast as a whole, for United States to some extent, and Europe can be a very attractive potential area as far as innovation is concerned, but we have to present ourselves, I think, both ways in a joint manner, representing Europe as an environment for innovation, and at the same time get into more detailed, specifications about each country, what the best country is, if you talk about, for example, biotech or fintech. So I think the best model is to follow both paths. One, aggregation, also at the continental level, and at the same time propose yourself as a country with your proposals. And that's it. And have a fair competition. I was attending a conference this morning at Stanford with State Secretary Blinken, and he was telling exactly the same. I'm sort of stealing his words. When he was asked about competition between among United States, China, and other big states, and he said, well, as long as it's fair competition, we have to go for it. We want to go for competition. He was talking about relations with China. We want a competition. There's a competition. It has to be fair. So the same thing about countries inside a continent like Europe.
Thank you. Let's open to questions if there are any questions there. There's one there. let me translate the question or try, it was a little low. So what are the opportunities? Sardinia is here also to support specifically the number of programs for startups in Sardinia. Is there any wider opportunity that you think that those startups should look at? And again, this level of aggregation is something that can be put at a share.
Yeah, what I keep telling Marco, and I think Marco shares my view, is that Italy has a very shared approach. Let's say public institution like the Consul General or the region or the government have to cooperate with private sector. So what we want is a dual company modality for our startups. As I said before, we don't want to make Italy poorer than it used to be. So we have to convince our startups and entrepreneurs to have double presence both in Italy and here in the Silicon Valley or the United States. That's the model we pursue. And I think in the case of Sardinian startups, that would be the strategy to try to make your startups come here, settle here with a legal entity in the United States to attract more capital, basically. And in that case, we keep organizing events, joint events as a Consulate General and Innovit, the new Italian Innovation Hub. So the trend would be to get all of them involved as long as we do, anytime we do some business events, we try to get the business community, Italian business community involved. I think my friends like ENI representative Salvatore can testify and witness the many events we've been having in the past month together. Is always been invited, but also minor companies, more companies have been always engaged in our events. So more than glad to get your startups involved. Yeah. The thing I wanted to tell you, we have a unicorn, which is Italian, it's Satisfay.
Yeah, you can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, no, just to let you know that, we are progressing as a country. We don't have the same number of other countries started as unicorns, but they are growing up, and that's a very good sign. And also because we are talking about a very important vertical, which is the fintech.
Yeah, the next one has to be coming from Sardinia.
All right.
All right, any other questions?
Any other
here?
question on the Italian side, Italian Consul General? Anyone needs a passport? No.
Actually, it's funny you say that. Yes, I do need a passport.
I keep talking about tech, but then what they need, what they really need is citizenship, passports, assistance for kids.
Here it comes. Stimulate.
Let's say, first of all, I'm lucky because I have also the Dutch passport, so at least I have an alternative, so I'm fine. So I can say whatever. So, okay, first of all, thank you for your point of view on how the role of the institution can be in Silicon Valley. My question is more about, let's say, what are the services that you are expecting that especially Innovit will provide for the corporates? So how we can best try to find out the way to, of course, foster the innovation as a value for the ecosystem here in the Silicon Valley, but as you said, most and foremost back in Italy.
Well, I think, Innovit has been conceived as an aggregation place for economy, so corporates, startups, scientific actors as well, so universities very much. We're going to have, for example, a presentation, I was saying to Alberto, of the Italian Istituto Italiano di Tecnologia, Italian Technology Institute in December. So we're trying to aggregate all the main figures of innovation of Italy, trying to aggregate them here in full cooperation with other subjects like Mind the Bridge. We have other friends we keep working with. And this is the main goal, to bring them here, also VCs, associations, Tech Italia and so on. Because we have to, what we believe is that we have to make the different sectors progress and become more accustomed to Silicon Valley approach, which is a very open one, which is a very wide and cross-pollinating one. So from university to applied technologies, from applied technologies to business to commerce, and that's the goal we have. So bring startups, corporates here, and well, the first, getting back very straight to your question, we have spaces. So the first thing is spaces both for corporates and startups. We are ready to go on with programs for startups as well. We hope that we can also offer, you know, we become an Italian innovation hub in the Silicon Valley. So it will be a place also for American companies to be there and mix up with Italian companies, which is another interesting thing and sector for both corporates and the startups and VCs. So that's the goal of our Innovate, and we'll have a team of experts dealing with that since next week. And apart from the two experts of innovation and FBI attraction of Italian trade agency. And the Consul General keeps going around to meet people and enlarge and widen our schedule and our contacts in the Silicon Valley together with all the friends here. Any more questions?
No, I think we're dead. We probably call it a coffee break. It's
Yeah,
4
we
o'clock,
be
so
absolutely dead after Gerard and more me than Gerard, but yeah.
no, we look forward to
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you so much.